People don't aspire to be backup singers. Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And we're in a weird time zone parallel universe warp here because our very first ever So Here's My Story happy hour with anyone who's even remotely local is happening in just a couple days.
Will take place
on July 18th.
Or has taken place.
Or has already, well, by the time this episode comes out, it will be several days in the past. So I'm just going to go ahead and predictively say that we had a fantastic time.
We did. I loved it.
It was awesome. It was so great seeing people in person, putting names to faces. I do know for a fact we have several people coming, quite a number of people actually coming from the Facebook group, people that I have not previously met. So I genuinely am really excited.
I am too, yeah.
And it was such a good time.
It was a great time. When they said that thing and all that stuff happened, amazing.
All right. You want to say a little bit about today's story?
Yes. So today, Jody brings a story that is kind of near and dear to my heart because I've actually heard you perform as lead in the Wafflers when you've ventured up to South Central Pennsylvania.
Yep.
And so this story comes out of the singing part of your life. And we go into a really interesting conversation in comparing the different roles in business with the different roles in creating an unforgettable sound.
Bum, bum, bum.
Bum, bum, bum.
So here's my story. As you know, I sing in a band.
I do know
and
that.
I love singing, and I love singing in all different ways. And what you may or may not know is that while a lot of times I'm singing lead, well, you guys, you and your wife have come to see, your whole family has come to see us. So a lot of times I'm singing lead, and a lot of times I'm singing harmony. And I actually love to sing harmony. In fact, as a kid, I think one of the first things I ever said I wanted to be when I grew up was a backup singer.
Really?
I remember my mom saying, honey, people don't aspire to be backup singers. I'm like, well, I do. But I really... That's
a great line. I'd like to pause for 1 minute to recognize that. People don't aspire to be backup singers.
But I love singing harmony. So anyway, but sometimes I'm singing lead and someone else is singing harmony. And so I was at this gathering thingy, and there was a song, and I was playing my new guitar, which I'm actually getting okay at guitar on. And this woman was singing harmony with me. Mm-hmm. And I had this really funny realization because she was very good at harmonizing. But there's this second layer to what makes a good harmonizer. One is picking a harmonized, the I guess you call it the melody of the harmony. I don't know how the pitch and the tone of what notes you choose to sing to create a harmony. But there's this other layer that I've always known to be the case, but I never really thought about until this other person was not doing that, which is when you sing harmony, it is your job to look at, follow, blend in, merge your dance steps with the person singing lead.
So harmony is not the lead dog here.
No, and in this case, and I don't think anyone thinks harmony is the lead dog, but she was acting as if it was a second opportunity to create a different melody.
Ah, okay.
So she was doing her own thing. And I noticed it because we kept getting off step because I did the song a little bit differently than she did. That was the other thing. It's a song that my band does, and over years of doing it, we've kind of made it our way. Yeah. And what's interesting is when I sit in with someone else, and they're doing their song, even if it's a song that we do, I watch for how they do it. Do they hold out this part? Do they skip that part? Do they, do this differently? And you have to watch them intently and kind of read their body language about what they're doing so you can match up the timing. And she was not concerned with that. She was just singing the harmony the way she knows the song. And so I was singing lead, but I was actually trying to match up with her. So I was doing the same things when I sing harmony, but I was trying to match up with the harmony person. And to be clear, we were all just having a great time. That didn't really matter, but and there wasn't some big ego moment going on there.
And you weren't recording it for later distribution.
And in fact, I had no problems following along with her, but it was just so interesting because when I, of course, surprise, surprise, immediately recognized ding, this is a metaphor for business. Because there are so many opportunities, especially if you are a naturally step into a driver's seat kind of person, whether you run a company or don't, or any kind of leadership, it can be very easy for you to like jump into a driver's seat. But I am always very conscious of like, is this a moment where I am the driver or is this a moment where I am the passenger? And, you know, is it my job? And it's not an either or. It's not like you just abdicate to like, well, you're in charge. So, but I think
I like that cartoon voice, by the way.
But I think what is really hard is when a bunch of people or even just two people are trying to drive at once, that doesn't work. So it also worked that like clearly she was going to drive on that song. So I just matched up with her so that it worked. If we had both continued singing the song, trying to both drive, it would not have worked. It was just a mess. It was all over the place.
Well, yeah. And by the way, I do think that would be just a brilliant interview question or due diligence question, which is, are you capable of singing harmony? And I mean that seriously, because here's the thing. There are a number of ways I can see this applying, but one of the clear-cut ways is when one company buys another company.
Oof,
because I see this very often. You have maybe the company that's being acquired, the founder rides off into the sunset, but you do have somebody.
Well, they usually have to stick around for a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you do have somebody in authority there who is coming into an existing organization. And unless they know how to sing harmony or can learn how to sing harmony, they're going to continue to do things their way, which is not the reason and not the philosophy behind the purchase of their company. And you have a CEO of the acquiring company who actually needs to integrate the cultures into one and integrate the philosophies and change the way business is done to create a whole, you know, and not one of disparate parts that go off in their own direction. And so I think that's one of the litmus tests of successful mergers or those that just don't work out. And I've seen both where the acquired executives don't sing harmony and they think, well, yeah, we got acquired and that's fine. And we have new stationery and a new logo and a new website, but we're going to continue we know our business. We're going to continue doing things our way. And it creates a huge problem.
Well, this is why I love the metaphor of harmony, because like, let's take what you're just talking about. What singing harmony metaphorically is distinct from is just, if you are the acquiree executive coming in and just singing melody in unison with the CEO, like you have a distinctive role to play.
Right,
it's
you do.
different. It doesn't mean just come in and like be a robot automaton.
No, you're not a clone.
No, you're not a clone, and you don't have to do everything exactly that way. But you have to match in. You have to merge and flow with, and you have to do it in a way that adds and doesn't become distracting and doesn't yank you. Like here's the other funny thing. I was trying to play guitar. I'm not that great at guitar. Like I really have to think. And in that moment, and it was a song that I know the singing part well enough that is sort of more in my back of my brain, automatic functioning kind of thing. I could do that on autopilot while I think about guitar. Instead, I had to think about guitar and think about how to like follow along with her because it was distracting. She was yanking me off a path that I could just do what I needed to do. And you know, again, it wasn't like some big ego thing. It really didn't matter. And it worked because I did sort of recalibrate to work with her. But noticing, it reminds me a tiny bit of, and I know we've mentioned this before in a different context, long ago, that video with the importance of the first follower. Do you remember that? Like how to start a movement. And there's the one crazy dancing guy who dances, but none of the rest of the movement would have happened without that first follower, the first person who can follow along and kind of do the thing. And like, I just think it's so important to be that. I mean, to know when it's your. I know actually we've done an episode kind of on this. When it's important to be the leader, and when it's important to be to like blend in and follow. And like following is an overlooked piece of being a good leader. Well,
it is, and I take a look at not just the mergers and acquisitions that we were just talking about, but the components of a management team, because you're right. Each component of a management team is not supposed to be a clone of the leader. In fact, that's to the disadvantage.
That is not
But helpful. They are supposed to add complementary pieces. And so there are a number of different components that I see in terms of creating a good management team or whatever. And one of them is getting very clear on a question, and you've seen this, I ask my clients this in contracts or in mergers and acquisitions, which is, what can I do over your objection? Or what can I do without seeking your approval? And you kind of show the limits of what that harmony is. There are certain things that I can do in structuring my department and structuring my initiatives where I don't really need your approval because I know that it's getting the job done. But there are certain dividing lines where all of a sudden I'm setting my own melody. I'm creating something which combined with yours would be dissonant.
Yeah.
And in that respect, maybe I'm exhibiting a different philosophy, a different approach to customers, a different approach to employees, a different personnel evaluation or hiring strategy, different social media, whatever it happens to be. If it becomes something other than a cohesive whole, even a different facet of a cohesive whole, then I'm not harmonizing anymore. So
now I'm going to take this metaphor one more step because you said the word dissonance, which is interesting because harmonically speaking, dissonance is a really useful tool, but it kind of comes back to what you're saying. You have a leadership team or a board. You don't want 100 synchronous voices always going, yeah, I mean, that's almost the Minions thing, like the claw, everybody exactly on the same thing. You need, there are places when you are harmonizing where dissonance is the power, but that dissonance has to resolve like that. You don't just keep singing dissonance forever. There's dissonance and then there's resolution to that where it comes back into whatever it's called. Cause I'm not that deep into the theory, of what it's all called, but that piece of it, because what's so interesting is, I mentioned boards. When I facilitate a lot of board meetings, and I see this even more than when I'm facilitating leadership team meetings, is boards are often made up of really type A, a lot of times business owners. They are people who are very used to leading and guiding, and they have a lot of evidence that their way of leading and guiding works because it works at their organization, but their organization is different than others. And you put them all in one room, and if they're all trying to lead and they're all trying to row, but you also don't want them all just sort of sitting there staring out the windows while one person leads. You need this combination of different pitches, different tones, some dissonance, but then resonance, and pulling it all back together, and just noticing when it's. But to your point earlier, sometimes there's the person who is the legal expert or the financial expert. In those moments, they do take the lead in the conversation because this is a legal issue. This is not up for grabs for us to all debate. This is whether or not that is kosher or not or are we within governance? And those kinds of things where different people take the lead, just again, kind of wraps really nicely into the metaphor of singing.
Well, I think that dissonance is useful, but if it's built in the process. So, for example, the term devil's advocate. So, devil's advocate, from my understanding, and people can chime in if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that it came into use when the question of sainthood was being debated for a particular person. And the College of Cardinals would appoint one person to always speak against, because they wanted to be able, they didn't want groupthink, and they wanted to be able to prove the case. And that one person was called the devil's advocate, speaking against.
So even if they staunchly believed.
Even if they staunchly believed. Another example, and I'll segue because you said as long as it's kosher. So another example is Israel. One of the reasons that Israel, as I read, one of the reasons that Israel was taken completely by surprise in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, they were attacked on all sides on Yom Kippur, and they, despite all their vigilance, they were taken by surprise. And the documentaries after the fact said that, well, all of the experts, all of the advisors felt that the Arabs would never attack on Yom Kippur. For whatever reason, they felt that there would be this respect, kind of like the Christmas Day truces in the World War I. They would never attack on Yom Kippur, and that was the groupthink, and Israel was taken by surprise. And from that point on, there was always somebody in military circles designated to take the counter viewpoint, to argue the counter viewpoint. And so I do think that it's, and other organizations have shown, it's incredibly useful to build dissonance into the process. But it is not incredibly useful when dissonance comes as a complete and total surprise.
Yes. Yeah. Fantastic point. You did remind me that I don't think this is a rabbit hole, but I'm going down it anyway. Watch me go. You reminded me of this exercise that a friend of mine and I used to use sometimes with large groups. It was just a workshop kind of thing we use for communication styles. It's called shadow boxing, and we would actually buy these giant boxing mitts. We would put them on and put referee shirts on them and everything on us, and it was funny. But there were four quadrants to the ring, and we would pick something really inane like paper clips versus staples, or, something like that. You put two people in there, and first they had to use person A and person B. So like the 4 quadrants, one was like, I'm right, you're wrong. And then the next one was, you're right, I'm wrong. So that was just one person A, whatever. Then the third quadrant was, we're both right, which is interesting to have them, argue from that standpoint. And then they actually had to argue like, we're both wrong. And it was really fascinating because often, interestingly, and what I always wanted to play with, and we never did, was try putting people there first to see if it was any different. Because I always felt like that quadrant at the end was the one that was the most surprising. Like they weren't expecting that one. They were expecting like, I'm right, you're wrong, whatever.
Yeah, sure.
They weren't expecting that we're both wrong. But it was often where the most valuable, like truly useful, because of course they're playing around with something like paper versus staple clips. Did I just
staple
say paper?
You also said boxing mitts, but keep going. Really, just keep moving.
Staples versus paper clips. But I was always curious if we started them there. Is there something magic about the we're both wrong kind of?
I think there is something magic about.
Yeah, or was it because they'd already worked their way through the process?
But you gather momentum. My thought is you probably gather momentum.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah. we never tried it going back around the other way. But that was always a fascination. But to your point, flexing your muscles around and trying out all those different pieces of dissonance and following and leading and being adamant and all those different textures is so useful in those kinds of things. And where I think it gets, what was very funny about this harmony experience that I brought to the story was my initial reaction, while I've spoken most about where we were, is initially I thought, well, maybe she just can't hear me because we weren't in a great environment for that. It was totally fair, but I was like, maybe she just can't hear me. So my first reaction was just like to sing louder so that she's like, right. she doesn't hear that I'm like, sustaining this bit or whatever. But that was not the case. She very clearly didn't really care what I was singing. And so when I realized that, I was like, all right, well, I will do the kind of reshaping to match this back up again. So anyway. But
it brings to mind two different contexts, right? So, and I know you said it wasn't a big deal and you weren't on stage in front of thousands of people and all that stuff. But had you been on stage in front of thousands of people, you still wouldn't have that opportunity because you're right there. Just same with a company meeting.
Yeah.
That's not the right opportunity to put a stop to the song in the middle and call somebody out.
Right. Also it makes way too big of a,
it's way too big of a deal.
Yeah.
But the other part is, when do you address that? I mean, let's assume, for example, I know
what if we sang in a band together?
What if you sang in a band together? If there were higher stakes, it was going to happen.
And it wasn't a once-off.
Again and again, it wasn't a one-off, et cetera. This wasn't just a 3-minute and 48-second exercise. You're going to go forward, or it's not just one company meeting. Mm-hmm. So when do you call it out, and how does that conversation take place? Right,
because I mean, it does. I know in that moment, especially given that it's a singing thing, I'm always aware of seeming, even remotely diva-ish. So if the message is like, sweetie, I'm Beyonce and you need to get in line. Like that's not really even how I felt. It's just that it didn't make for a good performance.
No, but sometimes that is not in those words, but that is the conversation that has to be had, which is, we acquired you, going back to this. Or, it says CEO after my name or whatever. You don't say it that way. But at the same time, there are conversations where you have to say, it is your job to harmonize and this is the way we need to do it. So it's interesting how those conversations actually take place and when you notice that they have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because where was I? I don't remember where we were, but we were someplace and there was live music. And I think it was just simply an issue of much like with us when we're out playing, we don't have a sound person who's there, we do our own sound checks. One of us goes out and the other two play and then another one goes out. And so you sometimes can have the mix a little bit off. And I think that was all that was happening with this person. But the person who was singing harmony, in this case, it was a guy, his mic was so much louder than the other person that you almost couldn't. And at first I thought he was just singing super loud. And I was like, no, I think it's the mic. But it was completely overpowering. And so that was all you heard was the harmony. And it was just overwhelming and distracting. And that's the thing. I think what's interesting about this is we're talking about harmony and lead and all these different parts. And what the problematic issue of it is when any of those people are not focusing on the larger product, which is, it's actually not about harmony or lead. It's about how it all goes together. It's the fabric of all of it woven together as the song. That's the only thing that really matters, not whether it's harmony or lead or dissonance or that. It's like, how does it all come together and does that thing work? Does it create what you want to create?
And that's really where I see a lot of problems arise, because that sort of thinking is not adopted. So when you purchase another company, what I see is, oh, they've got a great market in Wisconsin that we don't have, or combined, we're now a $40 million company. But they don't look at all the component pieces and whether it works to put together a customer experience, and whether it's a cohesive whole, and whether the messaging is correct, and whether the people get along, and whether the information can cross silos. And one of the reasons is I rarely see, in all of the transactions I've done, I rarely see the conversations where people say, hey, this is what we're about. If you want to, we're creating this and we hold these truths to be self-evident. And where somebody states their ingredients for a cohesive whole, that somebody has to fit in, because really it's all about, market share and dollars, and that's it. And a lot of times, even in hiring people, I don't see the conversations on what it takes to make sure that we are one unit and presenting with one strategy in mind, not one voice, but one strategy. Absolutely.
I'll tell you, it's funny. And another way and I would have never thought of this until we were sort of talking this through this way, but another way I see it happen, it's really funny. So we do a couple Indigo Girls songs. And do you know Indigo Girls?
I know who they are.
Okay.
I couldn't repeat a song for you if or name a song.
You probably recognize them if you heard them, but it's two women. They sing very tight harmonies. And much like with, say, like Crosby, Stills and Nash or something, it's just always harmonies, always really tight. And the funny thing is, every single time I have an opportunity to sing with another woman and do one of these Indigo Girls songs, one or both of us is the first person to say, because if you say, do you want to do harmony or lead? Every single time the person says, well, I don't know. I think I do the upper one because, and this is so funny, the Indigo Girls, their voices are very closely matched. I think maybe they actually switch. It's sometimes really hard to tell which one's the harmony and which one's the lead. And so when you're trying to do it together and neither one of you even really know, even if you're committed to I'm going to do harmony, I'm going to lead, it's not always clear which one's which. And so you go back and forth and it harkens to all those issues where roles are unclear. And, so even if we've been talking a lot about intent and sort of noticing your place and lining up, but even with the best of intentions, if roles are blurry and definitions are blurry, you can be stepping all over it and leaving gaps where we're both singing this part and nobody's singing that part. And it's just kind of funny. And it's hard. I've even watched the videos of them sometimes for songs I've been trying to learn that I didn't already know. And I'm I don't know which part's my part. I can't tell.
But the key, though, is to me, is that the Indigo Girl conversation takes place, which is, I'm not sure.
Yes.
If I've identified my role correctly.
Right. Which means that both of us now know that we have to watch each other like hawks if we're going to try to pull this off together. And because we're usually doing it live when this happens. And we know that we were in a situation, right? If we hadn't had the conversation, then it would just be an absolute mess.
Right. The importance wasn't in solving the problem in that instance. The important was in recognizing the potential and opening the conversation up.
Absolutely.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best
Lovingly
of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.